Motherhood is just such a mixture of laughter and angst, isn't it? So I'm going to share with you this morning one slightly funny, slightly distressing for me story involving both my children. For those of you who don't realise, Carl, our senior pastor, is my son, and Betsy, our family pastor, is my daughter. Now, she sat at our kitchen table as a little girl and said, "I will never marry a pastor." Well, she didn't. She became one herself. And she married an engineer who became a doctor. So anyway, this story involves a Cabbage Patch doll. Now, how many remember Cabbage Patch dolls? Those a little bit older remember Cabbage. How many had a Cabbage Patch doll? Oh, interesting. Well, Betsy Jones did not have a Cabbage Patch doll because her parents were either too poor or too mean to buy one. I'm not sure which, I can't remember. But she wanted one. She wanted a Cabbage Patch doll, and I found a copycat Cabbage Patch doll. You know, like not quite a Cabbage Patch, but it still had adoption papers. So Philip and I talked her into the fact that this little doll had nobody to adopt it, and nobody really wanted it, and it needed a mother, and it had bright red hair, and it had freckles, and would she take it? So she did that. There was to be a photo up there of the first Cabbage Patch doll that she really wanted it to be, and then the second Cabbage Patch doll that she took on. And so Betsy, I don't think it ever quite made the muster that she wanted, but anyway, she liked it well enough, and she took it to school. Well, she came home there it is. She came home one afternoon, and she was quite upset because the boys at school had got her doll, torn the head off, and kicked the head around like a football. And I was mortified. This was happening to my little girl. Anyway, the story goes on because her big brother went to the same school. So she went up to him, all upset. There he is. They were a tiny bit older than that then, though. And she pours out her story to him. Well, he steps up. He tears his shirt open, and there is SB, Super Brother. So he went, he beat up those kids. Well, not quite, but look how little he was. He faced up to those kids, he got the head back, and I got presented with the head. So I sewed the head back on, and we all lived happily ever after, if only I hadn't sewn the head on backwards. Not really, I just thought you'd laugh. So I imagine many mothers here have similar stories to me. You know, we feel distressed when our children are upset. We want to protect our children. So this Mother's Day, we're going to look at two famous mothers in the Bible and the distress they had to cope with, which was bigger than Cabbage Patch dolls. The first one was Mary, the mother of Jesus. 40 days had gone by since the baby Jesus was born, and it was time for Mary's purification according to the Jewish law. Joseph had to purchase a sacrifice for this purification. He could have, the law required either a lamb, or if you couldn't afford a lamb, 2 turtle doves, and if you couldn't afford that, if you were very poor, you could offer fine flour with oil. But Joseph was a working man, he was a carpenter, he was a blue-collar man, and he could afford the turtle doves. He couldn't afford the lamb. And so that was to be the sacrifice. And as Mary and Joseph made their way towards the eastern gate, an old man, Simeon, approached Mary. And taking the child in his arms, he prophesied over it. And then he looked at Mary and he prophesied over her. This is what he said, "And a sword will pierce through your own soul also." Now that's not the sort of prophecy that we like or that makes us feel good. The soul is the seat of the human personality. The intellect, the thoughts, the ideals, love and emotions are all qualities associated with the soul. And some mothers here today can identify with this piercing of the soul. You have been or you are going through tough times with your children. Well, can I tell you, you're in good company. Because Mary, as a young wife of about 16 or 17, is being told that this little baby will cause your soul, the very essence of your emotions, to be pierce through with a sword. And the Hebrew meaning of that word sword isn't just a little dagger. It's a very, very large sword that would pierce deeply. We'll come back to Mary. The second mother I want to mention this morning is Deborah. She was a judge and a prophetess in Israel. We don't know if she had natural children, but we do know that she had a mother's heart for Israel. The Bible calls her a mother in Israel. In Judges 4, the Israelites had been cruelly oppressed by the Canaanites for 20 years. And you know what? This was their own fault. They'd done it to themselves. They had denied the true God, and they had chosen to take on the Canaanite gods. And they took on with that the Canaanite practices, which were child sacrifice, sexual immorality, and temple prostitution. And it doesn't take much thinking to realise that the Canaanites would have been coming and taking the children of the Israelites for these sacrifices and for the temple prostitution. It was not good. It must have been just absolutely terrible times. But, as I said, the Israelites had done this to themselves, and they were under extreme oppression. And finally, they cried to the Lord for help. Israel had 12 judges over a period of about 400 years, and Deborah was the fourth judge, and she was the only woman. But that didn't hold her back. She cried out to God. She got on her knees. She pleaded with God, and he gave her an action plan. She was to take the Israelite army into battle. And it was not going to be an easy battle, because the Canaanites, they had the chariots and the spears, but the Israelites had nothing, because the Canaanites had made sure that they couldn't even, if they wanted to make a plough, they had to go over to the blacksmiths of the Canaanites. They had nothing. So this was not an easy battle. Everything I've researched about this battle, actually, it was pretty bad and pretty fierce, but they won. The Israelites won with God on their side because Deborah had cried out to God. So there was victory, the Israelites turned back to God, and there was 40 years of peace. Now, Mary and Deborah were so different. Mary was a biological mother, and Deborah was a spiritual mother. Mary was a homemaker. Her family was her priority, and that was her calling. She had at least 6 other sons and daughters. Deborah, by contrast, was a warrior leader. Her calling was to be a spiritual mother to her nation. And yet, though so different, they had so much in common. So by looking at the lives of these two mothers, we're given keys to help our children to cope and to help ourselves to cope in life's difficulties. You see, they both rose to the challenge of their life situation. When she saw the desperate state of Israel, Deborah sang, "I, Deborah, arose a mother in Israel." See, clearly she wasn't always a mother in Israel, but then the time came when she could not bear what was happening to her nation any longer. And she said, "Enough, no more. It's time for my people to be free." So she rose up and she sought God, and with that, God gave her victory. A few weeks ago, we went to the funeral of Philip's last remaining auntie. Auntie Ailsler passed away. That means Philip and I are standing now at the front of the line. You know how, like, before your mum and dad die, you're pretty safe back here, but now they're all gone and it's us next. So we had this talk with all his cousins, who's going to be next. So anyway, it was an amazing funeral. It was full of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who all love God and who all go to church. And that is so rare in this generation. But her daughter got up and she shared about how her mum, who was like about 96 when she passed away, she shared about how bringing her mum down to Melbourne and her mum was staying with her, and they heard noises coming from the bedroom. And they were like, "Oh, is she in distress? Is there something wrong?" And they went and listened. And she was praying. And she was praying for every one of her children and her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren. She was praying for them all by name. And her daughter shared that her mother did this twice a day. You see, she knew, Auntie Ailsa knew she could do her part. So she rose up in prayer. I love that on the same day that Simeon prayed for Jesus, God had a second person in the wings, a woman, Anna, who was at least 84 and had been widowed after just 7 years of marriage. She gave the rest of her life to prayer and fasting at the temple. She came up to Jesus and she also prayed over him. You see, these two people, Simeon and Anna, were praying people. They believed in prayer. They knew the power of prayer, and they had prayed faithfully all their lives. Their prayer was focused on seeing the promised Messiah come, and God had heard their prayer. I personally suspect that they were surprised the Messiah was a baby. But doesn't God do that? So often when he prays for things, he answers differently to what we expect. I know Carl has shared the story about when he was a little boy and he was told never to touch our neighbour's hose. He was over there one day with our neighbour's hose, goodness knows why, and it broke, it split. Well, he was one worried little boy because he knew how mean and fierce his father was. So what he did was he got a cloth and he covered the hose and he prayed for it. And then he went away. And then he came back, had a peek, but no, it wasn't, the hose wasn't healed. So he prayed again, went away, came back up. This went on through the day. Finally, he realised this hose is not healing itself. So he comes and he does the big confession to his father. His father goes, that's easy to fix. Chops off the end, reattaches it, and the hose was healed, wasn't it? The hose was healed. Differently to what Carl expected, though. And that's what happens. I just love the praying people in the Bible. I love Cornelius. I love Daniel. There were so many people. If you look at it, it's the prayer that was the foundation of our lives. Church, God hears our prayers. God hears your prayers when you pray them. I also love the imagery of God showing off his son to Simeon and Anna. It was a little bit like the pride we saw on Prince Harry's face. Remember through the week when he came out, before Megan came out with him? He was so proud. And I feel that God was a little bit like saying to these two praying people who he had a communion with, see my son, see my boy. So mothers and fathers, no matter what is happening in your family, no matter what your kids are up to or your grandkids, you can pray for them because this is an amazing weapon. Rise up and become a prayer warrior. Mary was called highly favoured by the angel Gabriel. But let's be honest, a child out of wedlock, giving birth in a smelly, unhygienic stable, having to flee from her home because the king wanted to kill her child, losing her 12-year-old for 3 days, lose mine for half an hour and I used to be in a panic, and then standing strong with Jesus when he was dying on the cross. That doesn't sound like highly favoured to me. And yet over the centuries of time, Mary has taught us that favour is not what we have or how prosperous we are. It is knowing we are living our lives in a way that honours God. The person who stays in that hard marriage, the person who embraces the difficult child, who copes with sickness or disability, but still honours God, they are favoured by God. Mary's response when the angel came to her was, I'm the Lord's servant. May it be unto me as you have said. Deborah and Mary were both strong women who rose up and embraced what life threw at them. So this morning I wonder what life's throwing at you. You can rise up. You can be like a Deborah or a Mary. With God's help, you can rise up too. And so there's just a couple more important keys from the life of Mary and Deborah to help you. The first one was they controlled their emotions. Their emotions didn't control them. An interesting fact about both of them, Mary and Deborah, was that they both talked about their soul. I've already explained the soul is our emotions and our thinking. And another name for the soul is the heart. And Jeremiah 17 tells us that the heart is deceitful above all things. You see, your emotions want to rule you, and you know that's true. Your feelings want to dictate your happiness. Your thought life wants to take you to dark places. But we have to talk to our emotions, and we have to remind them who is boss. We have to rise up over our emotions. In the middle of that intense battle with the Canaanites, Deborah spoke to her soul. She said, "March on, my soul, be strong." Why would you do that unless your emotions were feeling a little bit fragile? She was in command of her emotions, and she was telling them how to feel. Be strong. Mary also dictated to her soul when she said, "My soul glorifies God." This is what she decided to do. She was telling her emotions what to do. And finally, the second thing that they had in common, Mary and Deborah were both worshipping women. I love this. Each of them had a whole chapter devoted to the song that they sang to God in praise and worship. Deborah said, "I will sing to the Lord, I will make music to the Lord, the God of Israel." And Mary also sang. She sang that beautiful song of Luke 1, "My soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Saviour." Psalm 22 tells us that God abides in the praises of his people. That means he takes up residence in our lives when we praise him. And with that, we get victory and we get justice. We are the temple of God, and his rightful place is on the throne of our lives. Genuine praise and worship places him there. And with that, it releases authority into our lives. I love the account where Paul and Silas were arrested for casting a demon out of a slave girl. And that night, as Paul and Silas sit chained in prison, when they could feel nothing but depression, when they could feel like God has left them, they chose to sing hymns of praise to God. And suddenly the presence of God turned up. And there was an earthquake, and they were released from their chains. You see, when we enthrone God in our praise, we can be set free from all sorts of emotional baggage. Isaiah tells us, instead of a spirit of despair or depression, put on like a garment, put praise on. And that's what Paul and Silas and Mary and Deborah chose to do. They put praise on. I was feeling a little bit down this week, and I couldn't work out why. I was feeling quite depressed, actually. And then I realised it was the political situation of our nation that was depressing me. You know, you turn on the news and you hear half-truths, and you think, no, that's not the full story. And one group of ads would be bagging them, and the next group of ads would be bagging them, and then somebody wants to egg the Prime Minister, and you think, oh my goodness, what state are we in? This is just dreadful. And then I realised, you know what? I can put God on the throne of my life. And so my favourite song when I feel a little bit like that is, "Put on the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. Lift up your voice to God." How many know it? Oh, lots, Jessica. You told me not many people would know it. Lots know it. I said to Jessica, "Do you know that song?" She sang it. I said to her, no. I said, "Did the worship team know that song?" She sang it all the way through, and then said to me, "No, they don't know it." Yeah, you knew it. Okay. Love that song. But you know what? If that's not your song, if that doesn't gel with you, find another song. Find your music, find your worship, but put it on in the car. Do it. Immerse yourself in praise, and you will find that you are just lifted up, just like I was. My emotions were reminded that God rules, not Scott Morrison, not Bill Shorten. God is in control of my destiny. And thank you, Carl, for the way you prayed. I loved it. I loved it. That's how we, church, should be praying. So these two great women have reminded us this morning to rise up and embrace the challenges of life. They've reminded us to keep a close guard on our emotions and to be a praying and praising people. So this morning, I just want to pray over you all. Jess has already prayed for the mothers. So I'm just going to pray over all of us that God would seal this message in your hearts, and then we'll be able to break. So Father, I just thank you this morning. I thank you for the people in this congregation. I thank you that they've turned up faithfully on a Sunday morning, that their hearts are towards you. I just pray you bless them for that this very week. Lord, I just pray over them that they would remember through the week to be praying people, Lord, and that they would remember to be a praising people. Father, that some of them would even go out and buy a CD so that they can have praise around them. I pray in your name, Jesus. Just bless them this morning. And so we have outside for the ladies, has already been said, we have special coffee, special teas, Tim Tams for the ladies, not for the men. I heard one man was running around after the service begging women for their Tim Tams. Gentlemen, you can't do that. They're your ladies' Tim Tams. Okay? And the other thing I'd just like to say is it's possible this morning that you've come in here as a visitor and Christianity, you have not understood Christianity. If you have any questions whatsoever, please come to the front. We would be happy to meet with you, happy to talk to you, happy to explain Christianity to you. And further to that, if anybody is looking for prayer in any way, we were always available at the front. So thank you, have community, enjoy Mother's Day, have a great lunch. We're doing it at my house. Not all of you, just us. Thank you.